Carl Jung's final message about empaths challenges everything we think we know about compassion. According to him, the empath is not a mystical being with a supernatural gift. It's the child who is never allowed to be selfish. That constant drive to fix everyone, to absorb their pain, to erase your own needs for the sake of others, doesn't come from spirituality. It comes from survival. It's the result of growing up in an environment where your feelings were too much, your needs were too loud, and your very existence felt conditional upon keeping others comfortable. But Jung's insight wasn't meant to label empaths as broken. Instead, he saw them as individuals already on the path of individuation, the psychological journey toward wholeness. Deep down, you already know this truth. You've always felt that your empathy carried a hidden cost, a weight you couldn't name. As Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Yet for many empaths, that authentic self was sacrificed long ago to maintain harmony and avoid rejection. By the end of this journey, you begin to see why sensitivity feels like both a blessing and a burden. You recognize the patterns that transformed natural empathy into a survival strategy. And most importantly, you discover what Jung called sacred selfishness, the ability to set boundaries and reclaim the right to care for yourself as fiercely as you care for others. This is not about becoming less compassionate. It's about shifting empathy from compulsion into conscious choice. Jung understood something that most people overlook about empaths. What we call empathy in adults often starts as emotional hypervigilance in childhood. A child learns to read the emotional states of their caregivers, not for fun or connection, but because their safety depends on it. Picture the little one who studies their parents' moods before a single word is spoken, who becomes the family's emotional barometer, predicting storms before they arrive. Their own needs create tension, but anticipating others' needs create safety. Jung called this premature ego adaptation a survival pattern where children develop advanced psychological skills, not through healthy growth, but out of necessity. In such environments, the nervous system transforms into a kind of seismograph, finely tuned to every emotional tremor around them. This isn't a conscious decision. It's adaptive wiring. The brain literally reorganizes itself to survive in unpredictability. That's how empaths are born, not from magic, but from resilience. They develop what Jung described as psychological antennae, an extraordinary sensitivity to the feelings and needs of others. A gift, yes, but one that emerged from pain, and one that can only become truly empowering when balanced with self-acceptance and boundaries. Carl Jung uncovered something that changes everything about how we see empathy. Their survival adaptation, while necessary in childhood, came with a terrible cost: the suppression of what Jung called authentic selfishness. This is the healthy narcissism every child needs in order to form a strong and secure sense of self, Jung wrote. The healthy individual is able to love himself as much as he loves others. But for the future empath, the lesson was the opposite. Love others more than yourself, because your needs are dangerous. Many of us learned to read the room before we could even read a book. We became the family's emotional detectives, trained to anticipate storms and smooth over conflicts before they erupted. This creates what I call the empathic paradox. The same sensitivity that makes you so deeply attuned to others also becomes the barrier that keeps you from knowing yourself. You became an expert in everyone else's inner world, while remaining a stranger to your own. What once helped you survive as a child becomes self-destructive in adulthood. The child who is never allowed to be selfish grows into the adult who can't set boundaries, advocate for themselves, or even name their own needs. Jung made a startling discovery about what lies buried in the unconscious of those with empathic patterns. In the shadow, the rejected parts of the psyche, he did not find evil or pathology. Instead, he found what I call forbidden selfishness, the natural self-advocacy that was condemned in childhood. This shadow often contains everything empaths were taught to suppress: anger, the right to say no, the need for respect, the courage to put themselves first. He called this process shadow formation through moral conditioning. And here's Jung's revolutionary insight: those selfish impulses are not flaws. They are the missing pieces of a whole personality. Without integrating them, the empath becomes what Jung termed a wounded healer, someone who gives endlessly, but from emptiness rather than fullness. On the surface, they appear endlessly compassionate, but beneath that surface lies exhaustion, hidden rage, an unspoken desire to finally choose themselves. This isn't because empaths are bad or hypocritical. It's Jung's compensation principle at work. The psyche always seeks balance. When one side of the personality is overdeveloped, the other will push back from the unconscious. Too much self-denial inevitably generates its opposite. Jung called this tendency enantiodromio, when things, taken to extremes, transform into their opposite. The person who gives without end eventually becomes resentful. The one who never says no eventually erupts, and the empath who denies their shadow becomes bitter. Jung understood that integrating the shadow is not about turning selfish shit, it's about reclaiming the right to exist as a whole human being. Within the empath's shadow lies their sacred selfishness, the healthy ego strength that makes authentic relationships possible. If you've ever felt guilty for wanting to put yourself first, remember this truth: your needs are not wrong, they are human. Jung himself wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For empaths, that darkness is not cruelty or narcissism, it's the radical, almost forbidden act of believing that you matter just as much as everyone else. Jung identified a powerful psychological crisis that empaths inevitably face. He called it the individuation imperative, the moment when the psyche demands that you become who you truly are, not the role you learned to play for survival. This often appears as what I call empathic burnout, not just tiredness, but a deep, soul-level exhaustion that comes from years of abandoning yourself to serve others. Jung saw this not as weakness, but as the psyche's rebellion against continued self-betrayal. The symptoms of this crisis are unmistakable. You find that you can no longer fake caring. The old motivations no longer work. People's problems feel unbearably heavy instead of meaningful. You begin to resent the very thing that once defined you, your willingness to endlessly help others. Yet Jung recognized this not as failure, but as the beginning of psychological emergence. Your authentic self is trying to be born, but for that to happen, the false self built entirely around pleasing and serving others must first be dismantled. At this turning point, Jung's concept of the transcendent function becomes crucial. The transcendent function is the psyche's ability to reconcile opposites. In the empath's case, it means finding a bridge between the caring self and the self-caring self. It's not about choosing empathy or selfishness. It's about integrating both into a balanced state of wholeness, of course. This shift often comes with resistance. Empaths in this stage are frequently accused of changing, of being selfish, or of not being the same person anymore. Jung understood this as the collective's resistance to individual growth. Society is comfortable with the self-sacrificing empath, not the empowered one. But here's what Jung discovered: those who genuinely love you will support your individuation. They will embrace the version of you that finally learns to care for yourself. With the same devotion you've always given to others, the people who resist your growth are often the very ones who benefited from your self-abandonment. Jung called this differentiation anxiety, the fear that setting healthy boundaries will cost you your relationships. And yet, he reminded us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For empaths, this path requires what I call developmental courage, the willingness to disappoint those who preferred you small, diminished, and endlessly giving. If you've been accused of changing since setting boundaries, remember this truth: you didn't change, you just stopped hiding. Jung understood that this moment, this individuation crisis, is not simply psychological, but a spiritual emergency, soul's urgent demand for authenticity. The empath who answers this call does not become less caring. Instead, they transform into someone consciously caring rather than compulsively giving. This is where Jung introduced a concept often misunderstood: sacred selfishness. Sacred selfishness is not narcissism. It's not shallow self-absorption. Instead, Jung described it as the ethical obligation to become yourself, to recognize that you're first. Responsibility is to your own psychological development. As he put it, your vision becomes clear when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakes? For empaths, that inner gaze often reveals years of self-neglect disguised as virtue. To reclaim wholeness, what I call conscious selfishness must take root. Jung identified several key elements that make this possible. 1. Emotional sovereignty. The recognition that you are not responsible for managing other people's feelings. Jung understood that rescuing others from their own emotions actually robs them of the chance to grow. 2. Boundary consciousness. The ability to know where you end and others begin. Jung referred to this as ego boundary development essential, not just for personal health, but also for truly authentic relationships. 3. Need legitimacy. Accepting that your needs are just as valid as anyone else's. Jung observed that empaths often minimize or dismiss their own needs, while treating everyone else's as mandatory. What's remarkable is that empaths who develop sacred selfishness don't become cold or detached. They actually become more genuinely helpful. They give from choice rather than compulsion, from fullness rather than depletion, from strength rather than weakness. This shift creates what Jung called differentiated love, the capacity to care for others without losing yourself in the process. You can feel compassion without absorbing another's pain. You can offer support without assuming responsibility. You can love deeply without disappearing. Jung understood that the highest form of service comes not from self-erasure, but from individuals who have done their own inner work. Only when you are whole can your care for others be truly authentic, sustainable, and transformative. The person who reclaims their sacred selfishness no longer gives from a place of performance or people-pleasing. Instead, they offer the world their authentic presence. When you finally understand that taking care of yourself makes you a better support to others, you give from overflow, not emptiness. As Jung once wrote, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For empaths, this acceptance means embracing even the parts of themselves they were taught to suppress the need for recognition. Rest, reciprocity, and respect. All of these were once labeled selfish, but in truth, they are essential for wholeness. Jung made a profound observation about what happens when empaths begin practicing sacred selfishness. He called this relational recalibration, natural process where relationships either deepen through mutual authenticity or dissolve, because they were built on self-abandonment. When empaths start setting boundaries, they often uncover a painful truth. Many of their relationships weren't based on true connection, but on what Jung described as projective identification. In these dynamics, people weren't relating to them as full individuals. Instead, they were relating to roles: the caretaker, the listener, the problem solver. And when empaths step out of these roles, something revealing happens. Some people experience what could be called supply withdrawal. They become angry, manipulative, or even accusatory because their emotional needs are no longer being automatically met. But Jung also witnessed something deeply beautiful in this transformation. The relationships that survive evolve into what he called authentic encounters. No longer one person endlessly giving and the other endlessly receiving. These connections become equal. Both individuals take responsibility for their own emotions. Jung captured this perfectly. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. True meeting, however, can only happen between individuated people, those who know where they end and where others begin. That is why Jung emphasized the importance of what might be called relational selectivity. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your empathy. Not every request for help comes from someone truly ready to receive it, and not every relationship that feels familiar is healthy. Jung also noted that empaths often confuse intensity with intimacy. need with love and drama with depth. To grow, they must develop what he called psychological discernment, the ability to see people clearly as they are, not as you hope or imagine them to be. Only then can relationships become not a place of self-loss, but a ground for mutual transformation. The individuated empath attracts very different people than the self-abandoning empath. Instead of drawing those who seek someone to carry their burdens, they naturally attract individuals who are also committed to their own psychological growth. Jung observed that this transition can feel lonely at first. After all, the empath is breaking generational patterns of codependency, leaving behind relationships built on imbalance. But in time, this shift leads to what he called authentic, belonging relationships, rooted in mutual respect rather than mutual need. If you've noticed that, setting boundaries has changed the type of people who remain in your life, it's no accident. As the saying goes, I attracted my equals when I stopped accepting less. Jung's wisdom makes it clear. You cannot have authentic relationships until you become an authentic person, and authenticity requires embracing what he called sacred selfishness. Jung's vision of psychological wholeness can be seen in what I call the integrated empaths, someone who has reclaimed their sensitivity as a conscious choice rather than an unconscious compulsion. This person embodies Jung's ideal of individuation achieved. The integrated empath possesses what Jung described as conscious empathy, the ability to feel with others without losing themselves in the process. Sensitivity becomes a tool they use, rather than something that uses them. Jung identified several qualities of psychological integration that apply especially to empaths. The first is emotional choice, the ability to decide when, how, and how much to empathize. Healthy empathy, Jung understood, needs an on-off switch guided by conscious will, not automatic response. The second is compassionate detachment, the capacity to care deeply without carrying another's emotional weight. Jung noticed that the most helpful people maintain what he called loving distance, close enough to support, yet far enough away to maintain perspective. The third is the development of reciprocal relationships. Integrated empaths no longer enter one-sided dynamics. Instead, they naturally attract people who can also give, creating what Jung described as mutual individuation, where both people grow through the relationship, as Jung wrote. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are for the empath. Becoming their truest self means honoring both their extraordinary capacity for compassion and their equally important right to self-preservation. This balance leads to what Jung called earned security, a profound inner stability that is not dependent on others' moods, approval, or validation. The integrated empath can witness the pain of others without absorbing it, offering genuine compassion while remaining whole within themselves. And this integrated empath learns how to offer support without taking responsibility and how to love without losing themselves. Jung believed that this level of integration isn't just personal, it serves the collective good. Integrated empaths become living models of healthy boundaries, authentic relationships, and conscious compassion. They demonstrate that it is possible to be deeply sensitive without being self-destructive. The journey from unconscious empathy to conscious empathy is, in Jung's view, the true hero's journey of the psyche. It demands courage, facing the shadow, reconciling opposites, and choosing wholeness over approval. If you've ever learned how to help others without harming yourself, you've stepped into what could be called the path of the conscious empath. Jung's final insight about empaths carries a profound truth. Sensitivity is indeed a gift, but only when it comes from choice rather than compulsion, from strength rather than weakness, from wholeness rather than woundedness. At the heart of his teaching lies what can be called the freedom realization. It's the moment you recognize that your empathy was never really about other people, it was about you, trying to feel safe in a world that once felt unpredictable. Jung famously wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." For empaths, this realization reveals something startling. Their sense of responsibility for everyone else's emotions was often an unconscious attempt to manage their environment, keeping others calm, happy, and stable in order to feel secure themselves. What they once called love was in many ways psychological management, a survival strategy rooted in childhood. This realization can feel both liberating and terrifying. It means admitting that much of what looked like selfless love was, in fact, a defense mechanism. But Jung also discovered the gift hidden in this awareness. Once you recognize empathy as a survival strategy, you gain the power of choice. You can decide to keep it, reshape it, or transform it entirely. In that moment, you stop being ruled by unconscious programming and become Jung described, the author of your own psychological story. This is the birth of authentic empathy sensitivity, expressed from love rather than fear, from choice rather than compulsion, from strength rather than vulnerability. The integrated empath no longer feels obligated to carry the world. They connect with others because they want to, not because they have to. Yet Jung noticed that this transformation often stirs what he called existential guilt, the inner voice that whispers, "But I've always been the helper. People depend on me. What if no one loves me if I'm not useful?" This is the empath's final test: to embrace freedom without betraying themselves. To accept that true love and connection never required their self-erasure in the first place. Jung understood that this guilt is not a sign of weakness, but the final resistance of the false self, the identity built entirely around serving others. He called this experience identity grief, the mourning of a version of yourself that was never truly real, yet felt so familiar because it kept you safe. From this grief emerges what Jung described as the freedom paradox, the realization that having the choice to help others actually makes helping far more meaningful. When empathy shifts from compulsion to conscious decision, it transforms from a burden into a gift. The truth, Jung revealed, is simple but radical. You were never meant to be the world's emotional caretaker. You were meant to be a conscious individual, someone who chooses when and how to share their gifts. Your empathy was always meant to be a superpower, not a source of exhaustion, as Jung wrote. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For empaths, this means accepting that they have the right to exist without endlessly proving their worth through service. This acceptance leads to what Jung called psychological sovereignty, recognition that you are the ultimate authority over your own inner world. No one else has the right to dictate how much you should give, what you should feel, or who you should be. Jung observed that empaths who reach this stage often enter what he described as the reparenting phase. They learn to give themselves what was once denied to them: unconditional acceptance. This phase involves speaking to themselves with compassion, prioritizing their own needs, and honoring their own accomplishments. It is, in essence, the act of becoming the parent they always needed. This inner reparenting is not optional, it is essential. Jung recognized that no one can give from emptiness forever. The empath who learns to nurture themselves gains the capacity to nurture others from a place of fullness and authenticity. Yet sovereignty often comes with another challenge: grieving the unlived life. Many empaths eventually realize how many dreams, goals, and experiences they sacrificed in order to keep others comfortable. They may see that they chose careers, relationships, or entire life paths based not on desire, but on obligation. Jung saw this grief as painful but deeply necessary a way for the psyche to honor what was lost, while making room for what is still possible. On the other side of this, grief lies something remarkable. The empath who achieves sovereignty discovers that their capacity for compassion expands. When you stop bleeding yourself dry, you gain the strength to give from a place of true abundance. Jung noted that such individuals become conscious healers, people who help not from woundedness, but from wholeness. They no longer need to fix others to feel valuable. They no longer depend on being needed for their sense of self. This is the birth of what Jung described as liberated love affection freely given, without strings, expectations, or self-erasure. True empathy is not about creating dependency, and true presence does not demand reciprocity. Jung's message to empaths was never about becoming less sensitive, but about becoming consciously Sensitive reclaiming empathy is a gift you choose to give rather than a debt you feel forced to repay. But Jung also warned of what he called the integration temptation, the pull to slip back into old patterns when others resist your new boundaries. Growth, he insisted, requires holding firm to your truth, even when people pressure you to return to the version of yourself that once kept them comfortable. As Jung famously wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For empaths, this means honoring both their deep capacity for compassion and their equal right to exist fully, unapologetically, and without self-erasure. When you realize that empathy is a choice, not an obligation, you step into a new kind of power. If this truth resonates, Jung might have invited you to declare, "I choose when to care. And that makes my care more powerful." The integrated empath becomes a light for others, not through constant self-sacrifice. You show the world that it is possible to be both sensitive and strong, caring and boundaried, empathic and whole. In this way, the freedom to decide when and how to care transforms empathy from a weakness others exploit into a strength you consciously embody. After all, the empath is often just the child who was never allowed to be selfish. But Jung reframed this. Your empathy is not a flaw, is unfinished development. Many empaths learn to wield sensitivity as a survival strategy, not as a conscious choice. Jung's work revealed that the path forward is not about becoming less empathic, but about becoming consciously empathic. This evolution requires embracing what he called your sacred selfishness, the healthy ego strength that makes space for authentic relationships and genuine service. You don't need to choose between caring for others and caring for yourself. Jung's process of individuation shows that true psychological wholeness comes from integrating both. The child who was never allowed to be selfish often grows into the adult who finally learns to choose when and how to give their gifts. Sensitivity, when carried unconsciously, can feel like a burden, but when rooted in strength rather than survival, in choice rather than compulsion, in wholeness rather than woundedness, it becomes nothing less than a superpower. Jung devoted his life to showing that the most truly empathic people are those who have first learned to extend empathy inward, toward themselves. The next time someone says you're too sensitive or accuses you of being selfish, remember Jung's wisdom: you are not too much for this world, you are simply becoming enough for yourself. That shift from unconscious empathy to conscious empathy is exactly what the world needs. We don't need more people who give until they collapse. We need more people who know their worth and give from a place of abundance. If this resonates with you, you might enjoy my other video, Why You Lost Interest in Your Hobbies. After Awakening, where we explore how the evolution of consciousness reshapes not only your relationships, but also your passions and pursuits. The empath who was once denied the right to be selfish is, at last, free to choose. And that choice to love yourself as deeply as you love others may be the most generous act of all. It is the gift this fractured world needs most: whole, conscious, integrated human beings. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next dimension.